What's that can't stop laughing moment where you're in a situation you shouldn't be laughing? Back in 2004, I was at my cousin's funeral, and my aunt was in such a shocked state. She couldn't stop laughing. She was known to do this at funerals. Because laughing is contagious, I also started laughing a little bit, and I had to go to the back of the church and to the bathroom to get it out of me. My dad used to say you'll either laugh or cry. I always choose to laugh when I can. Although there was plenty of tears at his funeral, I also laughed a lot. Whenever I think of him, I think something funny he did or said, and although I still miss him, it hurts less. So laugh whenever you can, it beats crying in my book. Sometimes a good cry is what you need to feel better though. Wash out all those stress hormones. Edit. Speaking of which, for all your finals students out there, if you're feeling overwhelmed, try and cry for a few minutes. Might just help. I was at church for my grandfather's 5th year death anniversary, and the guy singing was so bad my grandma and me were almost died from laughter. Edit. It was more of a memorial than an anniversary. I did this at a wedding. They'd hired a terrible violinist for their entrance march, and it just kept getting more screechy and out of tune until finally I just burst out laughing. I did something kind of similar at my uncle's funeral. The funeral service turned into a sermon about how we're all going to hell unless we get right with Jesus. I'm not religious, but my mom is, and this was her baby brother's funeral. I noticed every time he said something about damnation, my mom would shake her head and let out this sigh. She didn't want this crap at his funeral. I'd also noticed that the pastor giving the sermon was constantly asking for an amen. I'd started counting them. So when I realized my mom was getting frustrated with how the service was going, I nudged her and whispered 13 and told her what was going on. Every time we heard, "Can I get an amen?" I nudged her and told her the number. She was trying to be so quiet but kept laughing. It made her feel better at least. Total requests for amens was 37. My mother and father went to a funeral of one of mother's aunts that she was not close to. In fact, my father had never met her. As they stood at the open casket, my father said to my mother, "She just doesn't look like herself again." My father had never seen the aunt before. For whatever reason, this struck my mother as very funny, and she started laughing. She held her hands to her face and ran from the casket. Her sister saw this and thought she distraught and followed her out to console her, where my mother had to explain that she was laughing and not crying, and why. She was so pissed at my father it was hilarious. When I was in my early 20s, my great aunt, who we weren't close with, passed away. At the wake, my mom and I went up to pay our respects, and I said I haven't seen Aunt Dot in 30 years, which made my mom start laughing, which in turn made me start laughing uncontrollably. Thankfully it was a packed funeral parlor and no one seemed to notice. There's a scene in The Pianist, which is about the Holocaust, where a woman is shot in the street and her body folds in on itself as she falls to the ground. We watched that movie in sophomore year English class after reading the book Night by Elie Wiesel. It was completely silent in the classroom during virtually the whole film, but at that part in particular, some kid piped up from the back of the class into the silence with this sad, disappointed tone in his voice, like he just found out the lunch lady was out of chicken nuggets. Oh, she folded. So many of us busted out laughing, and it was completely inappropriate, and I could not help it at all. The teacher was not pleased. Why the fucking coat? I'm cold. That had me in stitches when I watched that in class. Wasn't expecting it. Not me, but my friend. She was getting fired from her job, and all she could think about was what lebby fellas, mustard, or ketchup, from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. I like this, but I can only think of the one that is incredibly broken. At a funeral, the pastor kept referring to God as the great comforter, and all I could think of was a tacky bedspread glowing with holy light. Every time he said it, my giggles got worse to the point I had to pretend I was crying really hard and left to hide in the bathroom. God manifests himself in many forms. I had this really nice, but really awkward physics teacher in high school. He was a large nerdy man, but spoke with a lisp and a very soft voice. Imagine the guy from Office Space asking for his stapler. That's how he sounded. One day he is giving his lesson and mid-sentence he goes from this voice to what sounded like Satan himself. Okay class please. Deep hell voice. Take out your books. Cough cough excuse me, must have something in my throat. Then continued like nothing happened. I could not, for the life of me, stop ducking laughing, and I was the only ducking one. It was the most bizarre and ducking hilarious thing I had ever seen. I had to walk out of the class to catch my composure. This was at least 15 years ago now, and I'll never forget it. I have replaced one of your books with the Necronomicon. Open them very carefully. Watch the teeth. He's a biter. Apostrophe. Just stroke the spine. Love how this comment thread went from Lovecraft to Harry Potter. Just remember to say the 3 magic words before picking it up. My friends from college and I are still super close even 15 years later. There's an inside joke involving giving people a specific fake name that we always laugh about when we get together. Last week one of these friends tried to kill himself. We'll call him John. John's brother, another of the close friends, called me and told me that John had tried to kill himself and that he was at the hospital. Then he tells me that when asked for identification at the scene of the suicide attempt, John gave the paramedics the fake name from college. As sad as I was about what had happened, I bust out laughing so hard when he told me. I couldn't help it. I'm laughing now even thinking about it. All of the other members of the group had the same reaction when John's brother called them. All of them. We've got Lake of Fireside property in hell. Cheers. What a legend. Even at his lowest he was still ready with a killer joke. In all seriousness though, best of luck to him. Visiting my grandmother's grave with my grandfather for the first time a few years ago. Expected tears and a solemn day. Instead we passed a grave marked Wanda and my grandfather said, well, I wonder what killed her. None of us could stop laughing. My grandmother would have loved it. Leveled up dad joke. Granddad joke. In high school there was 3 religion courses you could pick. Catholic, Evangelic, edit, him told it's Protestant in English, or neutral. You would have different topics in class and different destinations on the yearly trip. I picked Catholic, and on the yearly trip we went to a monastery. On the 3rd day one of the exercises was to talk about death. So there's 20 kids in a circle of chairs and everyone's crying, because everyone lost a loved one at some point and death is a hard topic. The teacher starts talking about how she imagines death to be like, and begins to tell, I imagine after dying there to be a long spiral staircase, and you go down and down until there's a door, and behind that door. The rest I didn't hear, because my friend next to me whispers, a Mullican kebab stand. We both sat there giggling for like 20 more minutes until the meeting was over. To this day I feel really bad. This is exactly what I expect to find. With my luck. Can I help you? This is the afterlife. Yup. All the kebab you can eat. Except Tuesdays. Why not Tuesdays? You have to man the stand on Tuesdays. I can think of worse afterlives. Can we not eat kebabs while we man the stand? In school we did a course on mythology and had a project where we had to write our own mythological stories for the creation of creatures / places / etc. One kid wrote a story about how a man was abusing his horse, so the gods cursed him. One day his horse threw him onto a spear, which went through the back of his head and out of his forehead, and he transformed into the first unicorn. I couldn't stop laughing for a solid 5 minutes. The teacher berated me for laughing at violence, but the kid and I both thought that was funny as shit. That kid was creative on writing stories. Yes, but if I was there too, I'd join you on that 5-minute laugh. Mayo. When I worked with a financial advisor, he misspoke and asked me to check a client's investment in Blackcock instead of BlackRock, an industry fund. He didn't realize what he'd said, and he was super big on maintaining a professional, humorless working environment. So I couldn't point it out. I managed to keep a straight face long enough to excuse myself, then spent 15 minutes wheezing in a spare office. My granddad had, if you don't know me by now, played as the curtains closed at his funeral. Shouldn't have laughed. Couldn't help it. Legend. Edit. RIP my notifications. Thanks for the silver and pieces of flair. My dad had Queens, another one bites the dust on the way in, and Meatloaf spat out of hell on the way out. He was a character. My senior year of high school I went to this memorial breakfast with my principal and a few other seniors because my principal was begging a few of us to go and hey, free breakfast. So getting to the end this woman starts singing an incredibly moving song. And she's doing beautifully. But I look over at my principal and he just looks so dead. Like his face was completely blank. And because I also don't deal well with emotion apparently, I thought it was the funniest thing ever. So while this lady is singing and some people are crying I'm losing my mind and trying so hard to stop laughing and I can't. My friends thought I was having a complete mental breakdown. Like I'd finally lost my mind or something. I felt absolutely horrible about it and ducked out as soon as I could. Edit. This is the most liked thing I've ever posted on Reddit and it's basically me being a horrible person by accident. But thank you anyway. It's actually fairly easy to make people think an uncontrollable laugh is actually an over-the-top ugly cry. Oh trust me, I tried that tactic too. My best friend was there with me and was looking at me like it lost my mind. On the best date of my life I went to see a really stupid movie A Walk to Remember. Edit cause many are asking, with my first girlfriend. We were sitting in the 4th to 5th row from the screen and 2 rows ahead of us were a group of younger girls. One of them is rushing back to her seat with her friends and she slips and falls. It was a nasty fall too, and even though I felt bad for her I couldn't stop laughing. It was awful. I don't know why I couldn't stop and I was even like, God I know I shouldn't laugh but that's just making me laugh harder. It took me at least 10 minutes to stop. Girl who fell. If you're out there somewhere I hope my laughing didn't make you feel bad. To this day I still don't really get why it was so damn funny to me. This happens to a lot of us. And that girl will remember that day and she will just laugh about it as well. Some older kid at my school ended up in a coma after taking N2O. I think he ended dying. So it's a pretty dark story, and one of the principals came into an assembly and angrily declared nitrous oxide is no laughing matter. I think most of us were too young to know that nitrous oxide is laughing gas, but for some reason I knew so everyone was silent / scared of the angry teacher. And I was just there trying not to laugh audibly. It pains me to laugh at that. With a group of friends talking about random shit. After a while the topic of Alzheimer's disease comes up, and a friend comments that his grandmother died of Alzheimer's. Another friend goes, didn't know you could die of Alzheimer's. Always thought you died of the complications. And then another friend casually blurts, maybe she just forgot she was alive. I had to leave the room because I was crying from laughing. God damn you. My wife is struggling to have a phone conversation with her dementia-addled mother, and I'm trying not to laugh now. Fuck cognitive degenerative conditions. All you can do is laugh. High school English class, which was first period. A few days before I got in trouble for sleeping and coming in late, my teacher called me a hibernating bear, which I found funny. A few days later we are doing oral book reports and this one kid with a stutter was doing his. The class was being patient with him, but he was struggling along. Then he gets to a point in his book where he talks about a bear, which he stuttered. That reminded me of how just a few days before I was called a bear and how funny I thought that was. So I busted up laughing. I was not laughing at him for stuttering. I was laughing at being reminded of being called a bear. However, I realized that's exactly what it looked like. The entire class gasped at me in horror. I didn't even try to defend myself. But I do promise it was not directed at him. It was at being called a bear myself. One time in church, a priest giving a sermon on how God is a part of our lives in every way and is always present, etc. It was a deathly quiet service. Not the happy singing type. Unfortunately, he chose to end with the words, Jesus is in the mix. After a few seconds of stifling, I laughed the place down and had to go outside. I still laugh at the idea of Jesus as the DJ of our lives. Oh God. My professor was very solemnly telling us during an emotional discussion about when he watched the North Tower fall on 9/11. I was so horrified that I started laughing. I physically couldn't stop and my eyes were begging for help. I laugh uncontrollably when I'm uncomfortable and that was one of my worst moments. Edit, the wholesome award. Thanks. Now we are both going to hell. I remember in 6th grade my teacher was telling us how some people talked about random annoyances in the morning of 9/11 that made them late to the towers and ultimately saved their life. I remember the death glare from my teacher when I burst out laughing when she relayed one about a guy who survived BC. He saw a hot dog cart on the ground and was hungry before a meeting and figured he could get one quick, and so he went down and saw the plane hit while on the ground buying his hot dog. The way she said that his life was saved by a hot dog was the kicker for me. Hey PSSST, please subscribe and like.